It was 3:04 a.m. when Kelly's phone buzzed, the kind of pulse that wakes you with a small knowing dread. A voice memo, not a text, no preface, a single attachment that sat on the screen like a thing you weren't supposed to see. When you hear voice memo, you think private. You think breath in the dark. You think confession. But what Kelly listened to that night felt like something more. Half confession, half plan. Rumors suggest the recording was 28 minutes and 47 seconds long enough to change everything. And if you think that sounds like the start of a scandal, you're not wrong. But you're also not yet hearing the whole story. There's a certain weight to the hours after midnight. That's when the world thins and faces the small truths it hides during daylight. For people who live much of their life under public lights, performers, talk show hosts, the coaches of reality competitions, late nights are where the private meets the practical. Blake Shelton and Kelly Clarkson aren't just familiar names. They're two people who built a working friendship under the glare of live television. When the memo landed at 3:04 a.m., it hit a track already worn into years of shared jokes, late rehearsals, and backstage confidences. So the time itself was part of the message. This was meant to be intimate, urgent, and unmapped for public consumption. But what came next did something no one expected. It blurred the line between crisis and calculation. What the recording reportedly did was simple but devastating in its intimacy. Blake's voice, scratchy, worn, walked through a past medical visit, named a hospital and a date, and then said words that stopped Kelly in her tracks. "I can't do this anymore." Now listen close. That line sounds like a marriage ending. But in the recording it lands differently. He's talking about his voice, the very instrument that made him a star. According to the transcript, the recording referenced a June 15th visit to Mayo Clinic, used phrases that sounded clinical, and dropped a term later repeated online. I should be clear. These are claims drawn from the memo you supplied and from fragments people circulated after, not from a verified press release. Rumors suggest the diagnosis was framed as serious enough to threaten live performance, a threat that would force big decisions about NBC contracts, sponsorships, and public appearances. Kelly sat with that for 28 minutes and 47 seconds. Imagine listening to a friend recount the slow collapse of the thing they have always been, and then imagining what the world will do with that knowledge. At around 12 minutes into the memo, audio analysts online say something odd surfaces. A faint third voice, a southern tenor not matching the conversation's two leads. That detail, small and almost ghostly, is the hinge that turns a private confession into a public drama. The rumor mill named a manager, Mike, as the figure who might have had access or incentive to leak. Posters on forums pointed to GPS breadcrumbs and a sudden, oddly specific tweet from a burner account that used the same phrase as the memo. Again, to be clear, reputable outlets haven't verified that GPS claim or the tweet's origin, but the narrative took off anyway. From a narrative point of view, this is cinematic. A manager who thinks he's found a smoking gun, believing he's doing the right thing, and instead stepping into a trap. Whether the trap was planned or opportunistic, that third voice changed the geometry of the story, because it suggested someone else had heard this secret and acted. This is where the story becomes cunning. Some analysts online proposed a cold tactical theory. What if the memo wasn't an accident? What if the call, the timed PDF, the oddly placed leak were all pieces of a defensive chess move? Reports claim Blake had uploaded official documentation and then left a breadcrumb intentionally where the manager would find it. The idea: expose the leaker through their own greed. If a manager tweets language only found in a private document, the leak becomes proof. That theory paints Blake not as a broken man, but as a strategist, publicly vulnerable to remove a potential threat. It's a dangerous calculation, because it weaponizes the very thing most people would protect. A health scare, a fearful moment. And it raises the question, when you stage your vulnerability to defeat a betrayal, who wins? Privacy, reputation, or something messier? Trust eroded on both sides. And yet even the cleverest plan has a soft center. At minute 26, the recording allegedly changes tone. The bravado slips and a simpler fear emerges, not of losing shows or contracts, but of losing relevance. "I'm scared," he says, plain and awful in its mundanity. That line is why the memo landed, because it revealed a human truth everyone can understand. Fame does not immunize against fear. It amplifies it. Kelly's response, calm, steady, an offer to just keep being you, became the moral pivot. She didn't leak the file. She didn't weaponize it for clicks. She held the moment in her hand like a hot stone and chose how to use its heat. If the bait theory is true, then Kelly's restraint was part ethics, part instinct, and part seatbelt for a friend about to roll his life into a very public tumble. And if the bait theory is false, that restraint still remains the same. A friend who answered at 3 a.m. and chose compassion over leverage. In the hours and days that followed, or so the story goes, social feeds divided. One camp saw a man breaking down. Another saw a performance engineered for sympathy. A hashtag that some say began as a burner began to trend. And the media, always hungry for a clarifying angle, had fragments to chew on. The manager who was alleged to have been involved was reportedly confronted and dismissed. Insiders told different versions of the same endgame. Television ratings for Kelly's show spiked that week, which some argued was an inevitable byproduct when two major names collide under scandalous light. All of that is true in the sense that social attention followed the leak, but it's not proof of motive or orchestration. What's undeniable is the human consequence. Backstage glances lengthened, phone habits changed, and two people who had been easy with each other now moved with a small, careful distance. Casual warmth remained, but something quiet was missing. So what do we call it when empathy and strategy overlap? Is it manipulation in the service of self-preservation? Or is it a necessary, albeit ugly, tactic in an industry that chews through careers? The practical outcome, a manager gone, a contract intact, a fan base divided, looks like a net win. But the emotional balance sheet is more complicated. Some trust is lost whenever secrets become instruments. The subtle gestures, the coffee cup with a scrawled "thanks for having my back," might have been real. And they were also a public buffer against private vulnerabilities. The lesson here is not a neat moral. It's a bruise. You can win an argument and still lose a friendship, and you can protect your legacy while renting a small private room filled with regret. There's a final flicker to this story that lingers after the headlines fade. The recording was deleted from iCloud after the 30-day window. Fragments live on in screenshots and audio analyses. The rest exists in the quiet gestures and in the question the incident forces on all of us. At 3 in the morning, when someone you love speaks their fear, do you save it as evidence or erase it as mercy? Rumors suggest this was a test as much as it was a confession. Whether the test was crafted to entrap or simply to defend, the outcome is the same. Trust, once recalibrated, rarely returns to its old axis. If you were Kelly, what would you have done? Would you preserve the memo as insurance, or let it go to keep the person who produced it whole? The broader truth, and the one that matters most here, is that vulnerability can be a weapon, a shield, and a plea all at once. In the end, the story doesn't give us answers. It hands us something harder, a mirror,